Good morning, Dawg Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management. We're happy to have you with us. Busy show for us. We kind of joked yesterday, there are a lot of lists out there. I'm going to give you at least one list today that I think the Georgia fans are going to probably like, and I think you should do more than like it. I think you should use this as some form of comfort for the upcoming season. We'll give you that. There is more wild stuff going on at Tennessee. Where else? We'll tell you about that on the program today. And kind of just for fun off the top, what I think is sort of an interesting conversation as it relates to both Georgia and Texas, former Georgia great, pretty critical, kind of, call it throwing shade, whatever you want to, certainly pushing back on some of the growing hype around Texas quarterback Arch Manning. I think you'll find this to be interesting. It kind of fits into the larger conversation we've been having about Georgia as of late. So we'll begin with that here today. We're glad you're with us for it. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Breda Pest Management, the official pest control of UGA Athletics.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
We have been having a little bit of an ongoing conversation lately about what I believe is the potential for Georgia to kind of sneak up on some people in 2025. Now, let me be very clear about this. This is not for me, and I've said this before, what we did back in 2022 when I was very confident that Georgia was far better than people realized coming off a national championship. It was almost at that time that people sort of expected Georgia to, in some form or fashion, kind of return back to earth and, high altitude of a national championship season, but a little bit more of what the media would have thought of as a normal Georgia year coming in 2022. And we sort of felt at the time like, I kind of think that Georgia might be better than this. It turned into go for two in 22, and the rest, as they say, was history. I don't know that we are that confident about Georgia going into this season, and frankly, I don't know that I'll ever be as confident about Georgia going into any season as I was about the Dogs in 2022. But it is at least a little bit of a similar vibe here that, boy, it seems like a lot of people are finding a lot of reasons, almost like reaching for stuff. Sometimes it feels like when it comes to being skeptical about Georgia. And I would say personally, you're perhaps not surprised. I'm not the most objective source on this. I'll certainly grant that. But I would say that some of the skepticism that we're hearing about Georgia right now, whether it be against the schedule that it's playing or it's, certain issues with its roster, needs for improvement from the previous year, I would say that some of this skepticism is overstated. So I want to begin kind of where we were a little bit yesterday, and then I want to kind of move to something completely different from a pretty prominent voice in Georgia's football community here. Let me start with this. So yesterday, Jake Fromm on the show, always a great guest every Tuesday with us. That's his typical day to be here on Tuesday. We were talking about this very thing, the notion that when people look at best players in the sport, you don't see a lot of Georgia names showing up. When people look at kind of projections for the college football playoff and who's going to win the national championship, you're not hearing a ton of that around Georgia right now. That Georgia's just not among the most discussed, or if you want to say it like this, the most hyped teams in college football this particular offseason. That's just not kind of what Georgia is right now. And so when Jake was on the show yesterday, we sort of talked a little bit about the possibility that maybe Georgia, because my honest belief is that they're actually fairly similar to what they've been on paper in recent years, that because of that, maybe Georgia would have the chance to sort of sneak up on national media or some of the opponents this year, that Georgia might actually be a little better than it's currently given credit for. And when Jake Fromm on yesterday's show was discussing this, he kind of made reference to another team on Georgia's schedule who's become a little bit of a nemesis for the Dogs that is certainly getting a lot more of the attention, maybe at the expense of UGA. This was interesting from Jake yesterday, and it sets us up for where I want to go today. Let me start with Jake Fromm from yesterday's edition of our program.
If you look at it on paper, there's not a whole lot of names that just really jump at you like, hey, man, this guy's definitely going to be a top 5 pick. But that doesn't necessarily mean that there's not going to be a successful football team, because as we all know, a football team is way more than just one individual, top to bottom. I just find it really hard to believe, as well as Kirby has been recruiting over these past years, that there are not guys who are in the program and ready to go, that have gotten reps and experience through practice, that are able to step into these roles and ready to roll. I think when you kind of start looking around, you start comparing apples to apples. I mean, yeah, I think Texas is really good. They spent a lot of money in that program. I think Arch is really going to be a fantastic player. I can't say with conviction that they're light years ahead of where this Georgia football team is right now.
So that's really interesting to me, because what it sort of speaks to is kind of a contrast that's very quickly being drawn between Georgia and Texas. It certainly seems like in some pretty key ways, Georgia and Texas are almost natural opposites. For instance, a year ago, we thought Georgia played a very tough schedule. We thought Texas played a very easy schedule. This offseason, Georgia not getting tons of attention, not getting tons of pats in the back, no one really seemingly bragging on them. Texas is getting a lot of that. They have a chance to be preseason number 1, even though, as we've told you before, Georgia beat Texas twice a year ago. That doesn't seem to slow down the hype that exists around Texas, and in particular the name that Jake Fromm mentions there, quarterback Arch Manning. So it's almost as if you can't talk about one of these things without talking about the other. The question to Jake was, what do you make of the fact that there are a lot of people out there that just don't seem to think that Georgia's going to be as good as it's been in recent years? And the way I set Jake up for that was, am I wrong for still feeling like Georgia's actually pretty good, and that the lack of attention that Georgia's getting right now may be viewed by the end of this upcoming fall as a little bit of an insult, but also another dark mark on a media that has a hard time with its preseason predictions when it comes to college football? And I think, as Jake correctly kind of points out, you can't really talk about Georgia in this regard without kind of talking about, well, who in the SEC is getting all of that attention, and it's obviously Texas, and it's its quarterback, Arch Manning. Now, the truth is, I have nothing against Manning. I'm going to tell you more about that in a moment. But it is very compelling to me how quickly Manning is becoming one of the hot-button names in college football in a way that we don't always have in our sport. Like, we've always got, a recognizable list of top quarterbacks. We oftentimes have some pretty famous names, but I don't know that we always have in college football what I think of as like true cultural figures. Tim Tebow would have been an example of this. Someone that just everybody had an opinion on, like the Stephen A. Smiths and the Skip Baylesses and the people like that. They're sort of talking about these guys on television. College football just doesn't often have a lot of those sort of figures. But it does seem like, despite the fact that he hasn't played very much yet, and in the times that he did play, I don't know that we were bowled over by how spectacular it was. It seems like Arch Manning, and a lot of this is obviously due to his last name, is becoming more than just a well-known player in college football. He's becoming one of those cultural figures where it sort of seems like everybody kind of has to have an opinion about him. And as you know, this is relevant for Georgia because Texas, without Manning a year ago, stood in Georgia's way. Georgia had to beat him in October, otherwise they probably don't make the college football playoff. Georgia had to beat him in December, otherwise they're going to let this newcomer to the SEC steal an SEC championship away from kind of a heritage member right there in the very first year. That Texas was a very important part of the Georgia story in 2024. We believe, with the Longhorns coming into Athens in November, that Texas is going to be a very relevant part of Georgia's story again for this upcoming season as well. So therefore, how good Arch Manning is in his first full season as a starter, this is more than just sort of a theoretical exercise, more than just an argument for the sport of it. This is something that has, I think, a natural consequence for Georgia on one side of this or the other. So therefore, when a former Georgia great speaks out on all of this, Manning standing as one of the obstacles towards Georgia getting back in the national championship conversation for 2025, we are going to take notice of that. You just heard in the clip we played, Jake Fromm say, I don't quite know how good Texas is, but I assume that Arch Manning is going to be a very good quarterback. Well, let me give you now a different opinion from a different former Georgia quarterback who is a lot more skeptical of Arch Manning than Jake Fromm told us he was on yesterday's show. Aaron Murray, frequent appearances in the media. He was on with Sirius XM radio. I guess it's this week. And in the topic of Arch Manning, Aaron Murray, the former Georgia quarterback, record-setting guy, very prolific passer here at UGA, knows the quarterback position, telling the radio show he was on this week on Sirius XM radio that he's not quite so sure that Arch Manning is destined to live up to all the hype that seems to exist around him right now. This is Murray. Take a listen. I think this is interesting.
I am not sold like so many other people are that this guy is like going to be the number one pick in the NFL draft, that he's going to just be unbelievable, that he's going to be the next coming of Payne and Eli, but that's mobile. Like, I'm like, you know what? And I said this last year during the season too, because I was a big fan of Quinn Ewers heading into the season. I thought Quinn did some good stuff at times last season, but let's be honest, Texas had probably the second or third best roster in America. Probably the second or third. Why were they not competing for a national championship? Is because Quinn was holding them back. Quinn did not perform to the level that I thought he could. And then you see now in the NFL draft, I mean, he gets drafted in the 7th round. So even NFL scouts are saying like this guy's just maybe not as good as anticipated.
So listen, I think it's an interesting point that Murray's making there. Well, if Manning wasn't even playing over Quinn Ewers, then how good can we really be sure that Arch Manning is? And I can say this. We were early adopters to the "are we sure Quinn Ewers is good?" question. We said that a lot last season. We were always on guard for more of Manning against Georgia, especially in the SEC championship. That never really came. I will say, though, that while I do still think it's strange that Manning didn't play more given the obvious limitations that Ewers showed, especially in that October game against Georgia, I don't know that it's quite as simple to say, well, if Ewers was playing and he wasn't great and Manning wasn't playing at the expense of Ewers, and therefore Manning may not be what he's all cracked up to be. I don't know that it quite works out quite so simply, but someone who knows the quarterback position better than me, Aaron Murray, is pretty convinced by that argument right now. He went on to talk more about what the presence of Ewers a year ago meant for Arch Manning if Manning was standing there watch Ewers play at below kind of the elite level. This is more of Aaron Murray. He's on with Dari Noka here, by the way. This is SEC This Morning on Sirius XM Radio. More from Aaron Murray.
If you are so good and everyone has you projected number one pick in the NFL draft come 2026, why in the hell are you not playing above a 7th round quarterback? If Steve Sarkisian knows what he's doing and he knows how good their roster is, which I've talked to a lot of coaches at a lot of different teams, and I asked them, like, what are the top rosters? Ohio State, Texas, probably Georgia. What it was holding them back? Quinn Ewers. Why was Arch not playing? So like that rubs me the wrong way a little bit. And then you watch the tape and yeah, it looks good at times. I wouldn't say like it looks incredible. It doesn't scream first round talent to me off the back. And I'm not saying he can't get there. And I'm never going to talk bad about a quarterback because I know how difficult it is. I'm cheering for him like I cheer for every quarterback. I want them all to have success, but I need to see it first. I'm not going to crown you this all-American superstar when I haven't seen you do it. Like right now, I would have a middle of the pack in the SEC when it comes to quarterbacks.
So, admittedly, some of this is just for fun. We're kind of reacting to a hot take, to a voice we know well, a player we've known for years. Aaron Murray's a part of our community here. And so him speaking out on Arch Manning, some of this is just for fun. But I do want to use this, though, to make a little bit of a larger point. And it's honestly in contrast to Murray a little bit, even though Aaron, I will be first to tell you, knows a lot more about the quarterback position than I do. I think there are some things that don't necessarily have to be true. For instance, I began the show today by saying, I think that Georgia is a little bit underrated, at least insinuating that Georgia might be a little overlooked right now, not getting the attention they deserve, that Georgia may be better than they're currently being treated by the media. However, just because that's true, that doesn't necessarily mean that the team that's getting the attention that maybe should be coming to Georgia's way, that doesn't necessarily mean that that team is overhyped. Like, those two opinions don't have to cancel each other out. If Georgia's overlooked and underrated, therefore a team like Texas must be overrated and getting far too much attention. I don't think that's necessarily the case. And for all the issues I have with Texas and the way in which they've been treated since coming to the SEC, the truth is this is a team that has been in the college ball playoff back-to-back years. They've been in the Final Four the last 2 years. Steve Sarkisian's proving himself to be a pretty good coach. He's been around Arch Manning the last couple of years, watching him waiting in the wings. If he thinks he's got a good quarterback, those inside the program, I would say, typically know better than the rest of us. In fact, while I have a great respect for what Murray says there, I would say that my overall opinion about Manning is probably a little bit more in keeping with something else that Jake Fromm said on our show yesterday. Now, full disclosure, Jake will be the first to tell you that he and Arch Manning have a little bit of a relationship with each other. They've known each other going back to the old Manning passing camp when, as Jake told us yesterday, Arch sort of handpicked Jake to be his counselor in the year that Manning was going there as a high school guy, and Jake was one of the famous, they always have the college quarterbacks be the counselors. So Arch and Jake have known each other a little bit, but I don't think that changes the nature of Jake's opinion. He apparently thinks that Arch is better and destined to be better than Aaron Murray is convinced of right now. This is Jake Fromm, once again, from our show yesterday.
I don't think it's kind of more of the argument of if Arch will succeed, it's just kind of when. How long will it take him to figure it out? It could be a year, it could be 2. He could have an above average college career, and I think he could still get drafted high because people are going to speculate and project that he is going to absolutely figure the game out at some point and just become an absolute dominant player. So, and then I really think it's not about if, it's when it comes to Arch. It could be in week 2, could be in week 1. It could be in week 10 or 11, or it could be, hey, he needs to come back to college another year and figure it out. So to me, it's just not if, it's when.
I'm watching our YouTube comment section. One of our guys, Wildman Slayer, on there is talking about the photo. Do you remember the one where you had Arch and Quinn sitting side by side and they both looked like they had just seen a ghost? This is going back to the game in October when, Georgia was just getting after both quarterbacks. A lot of that was Quinn Ewers. Arch Manning did briefly come in too, and they're both like, oh my gosh, this is big boy football. I'm not quite so sure we're ready for it. So if you remember that particular photo, maybe now you're saying, listen, I don't care who tells me that Arch Manning's good or whatever else. I saw with my own eyes a guy that seemed pretty bothered by the Georgia defense a year ago. And I would say you're well within your rights to feel that way if that's the way that you feel. I do believe, though, that Jake Fromm's opinion is likely closer to accurate than the, pretty high level of skepticism that Aaron Murray showed. But let me kind of bring this back solely to Georgia just for a minute, and this is sort of the reason why we bring all this up here today. Ultimately, I don't think you can count on Georgia's most hyped up opponents being overrated as a pathway to get the Dogs where you want them to go this year. A year ago, we talked a ton about how difficult Georgia's schedule looked on paper. I think there is, some sort of consensus of belief here in 2025 that magically it's supposed to be easier simply because teams like Alabama and Texas are now home games. But I've told you plenty. I'm just not quite so sure that's the case. Texas was a really tough game for Georgia a year ago, even though Georgia won them both. I think it's still a really tough game right now. I don't think you can count on Arch Manning being some sort of, social construct, media construction as a way of getting you back in the national championship picture. I think you're going to have to tussle with Texas to get there and count on probably a pretty good game from Arch Manning and finding a way to kind of negate that and overcome it with your own performance. I think the Georgia schedule for this upcoming year is still really, really tough. And just because Georgia's underrated doesn't mean anyone, Texas included, on the Dawg schedule is overrated. That a lot of these teams that Georgia slated to play, they probably will be really tough games. But the good news is, even though we would say that way too much attention is going to guys like Arch, just because Georgia's not getting a lot of that attention right now doesn't mean that Georgia doesn't have some future household names of its own. A year ago at this time, a lot of national media types didn't know who Jalen Walker was. Go back to 2021 when Georgia broke through, won the national championship for the first time. A lot of people around the sport wouldn't have known all of those future first-round picks that were on that team as well. Georgia has proven capable of providing surprises in the past. And this upcoming season, while everybody's fixated on Arch Manning, we might find out that Georgia's got some players across the field, across the board, on both sides of the ball who are pretty deserving of some attention too. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management. We are glad you are with us, whether it's live on video at 10 a.m. or across all video platforms on demand anytime after that. Really, most people kind of connect with the show after it's live. So whichever way you choose to get here, we're glad you're here with us for it. Our friends on the radio, Athens Sports at Radio 960 we love being with them. Podcasts, Apple, Spotify. We post the show on the world-famous DawgNation.com. Some of you still listen directly on SoundCloud. Small number of people. But listen, we try to serve people no matter where they are, however you get to us. There are a lot of podcast platforms, frankly, we've never even heard of, but somehow we seem to show up on those too. So whatever it is, we're just really glad you're with us and a part of our program today. And big thanks to our friends at Breda Pest Management who make it all possible. Now, look, I'm thankful that we've got great sponsors all the time, no matter what. But let me tell you in particular, one of the things that I really like. I love the fact that myself, as a Georgia fan, speaking to you, other Georgia fans, I love the fact that so many times around here, when I point you in the direction of one of our great sponsors, so frequently who I'm pointing you to, that person is also a big Georgia fan too, living in a Georgia community just like yours and cheering on the Dogs and loving local sports just like we all do. And I can promise you, our buddy Matt Breda from Breda Pest Management, that is exactly what they are all about. And frankly, that's what Breda Pest Management has been now for multiple generations. And in this day and age, that's sort of the thing that I look for, especially when you look at so many different aspects of home services where it's, big conglomerates coming in and like names are changing and, organizational structures are changing. And listen, sometimes that kind of stuff just sort of has to go on. But I love when a company has been in business, same type of people, same last name, people deeply connected to the work and deeply connected to their clientele, their client base. That's what our friends at Breda Pest Management are all about. Since 1975, they've been doing that. I see their trucks literally all over the place all the time, and I love that, and I think you will as well. So I want you to check them out online. It's BredaPest.com. That's BREDA, BredaPest.com. And when you make the switch to Breda Pest Management for your termite protection, to keep those bugs and critters out of your house, to keep the mosquitoes out of your yard, all that kind of stuff, when you make the switch, they're going to put more money back in your pocket just for making that decision. Let's face it, the company you've been working with, maybe every single year you get that letter in the mail, the cost of service is going up, even though maybe in your mind it may seem like the quality of the service you're getting is maybe going down. With our friends at Breda Pest Management, that is not going to be the case. So I want you to reach out, find them online, put more money back in your pocket just for making the switch. It's BredaPest.com, BREDA, BredaPest.com for more on that today. All right, we're going to get Mike Griffith here coming up in just a little bit. Mike had a chance to speak to Georgia Athletic Director Josh Brooks on his show On the Beat on Monday. We'll talk about that and some other things with Mike here today. You're going to love that. Also, before we're done today, there is some like legitimately it just seems like all the craziest stuff in the SEC seems to come from our friends at Tennessee. So we'll get to more of that here coming up in just a little bit too. Prior to that, though, let's get ready to go around the doghouse. And it's presented today by our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau. Happy to have them bringing around the doghouse to us here. And we joked about this yesterday that we're kind of in list season. And, there's a little bit of anxiousness on the part of some Georgia fans that whether it be the list of this, the list of that, you're not necessarily seeing a lot of Georgia guys up near the top, a lot of these various lists. We've told you before, while we don't really have a ton of reason to be too concerned about that. But let me instead now give you something a little bit different. Let me give you a list that we would say really matters, and perhaps it matters any more than any of the other lists you're going to be seeing this time of year. And good news about the fact that the most prominent Georgia Bulldog of them all is right at the very top of this particular list. I saw where ESPN.com the other day came out with its top 25 coaches for 2025. And listen, we'll do all kinds of top coaches lists, both for Georgia and the other names in the SEC. It's one of the most interesting conversations you can have. Believe me, we will have it. But let me instead, though, just focus on Kirby Smart. And let me make a very simple point that I think is just inarguably true. When we're kind of fixating on who are the best players and what's the best this and what's the best that, I don't think there's anything you want more right now than to have the best coach, because coaches can provide a level of stability that can outlast this current period of chaos that sport's dealing with. And when you're a really sharp-minded guy, you just have the ability to lead through this. In life, leaders matter. And the leader of the Georgia organization, Kirby Smart, is being called by the kind of main media outlet that covers all this the best coach in college football. Simple, full stop. There may be nothing more important than that. Let me read to you a little bit from ESPN here on this. So Kirby Smart gets the top coach number, the number one next to his name, got 11 of the 12 first-place votes. We will tell you later on the show the only other coach that got a first-place vote other than Kirby. And believe me when I tell you, you may detach a retina from rolling your eyes so hard, but we'll get that to you coming up in just a little bit. The point is, here's the write-up on Smart. It says, Smart needs only 5 wins. Now listen to this. This matters. Only 5 wins to move to second all-time in wins through the first 10 seasons of a coach's career. So not only is Kirby Smart the current best coach in college football, almost unanimous consensus, he is essentially a historic figure, a guy who is one of the winningest coaches of all time through the first decade of his career. It says entering this season, he trails only Chris Peterson, Bob Stoops, and George Woodruff in terms of the number of wins he's gotten that early in a career. So that's the story for Kirby Smart. Not just currently the best coach in college football, but a historic figure. Few have ever won more so in the first decade than Smart has won. Also, in terms of kind of the distance that exists between him and the other coaches in college football right now, do we have the other line here from Mark Schlabach? A question was posed to Schlabach in this story to ESPN.com saying, this is the second straight year Smart was the runaway pick as the number one coach. Schlabach asked, will he be number one again next year? Here's what Mark Schlabach writes. He says, with more first-round NFL draft picks than losses, and you've heard that said over and over again, and with back-to-back national titles in 2021 and 22, it's hard to argue it could be anyone other than Smart with Nick Saban retired. Schlabach does acknowledge, I guess if Ryan Day got at Ohio State to a second straight title or Dabo Swinney captured his third, you could make the case there better, but I don't think that Georgia's program is going to slip anytime soon. Mark Schlabach is a guy we like. He's a voice that we respect. That last sentence there is not a throwaway line. that in a world in which people are trying to figure out the NIL and the exorbitant rate being paid to some incoming freshmen and the challenge of the transfer portal and the fact that the SEC is getting tougher, the fact that the college football playoff has changed and looks like it's about to change again, there's all kinds of chaos around the sport and chaos circling around Georgia football. But Mark Schlabach says in clear and in uncertain terms, or I should say in no uncertain terms, that he does not think the Georgia program is going to slip anytime soon. So as you're paying attention to lists and who's ranked where and what people think about Georgia and who's overlooking Georgia, you can't overlook Kirby Smart. He's still the best coach in college football, and that is still the most valuable commodity to have as you move into the upcoming season. Now, before I get Mike Griffith here coming up in just a moment, as I lead into Mike, given Smart's presence as the best coach in college football, it also gives Kirby a level of comfort in the decision-making process going on in the future for Georgia football, so much so that we've talked about on Friday and things like that. Smart has said right now they don't really feel like they need the true kind of NFL-style GM because, you know, Kirby didn't say it this way, but I can say it this way for him, that whoever he would hire wouldn't do that sort of thing as well as Kirby Smart could do it himself. That's how Kirby views that. And another important figure in the Georgia athletic department, the athletic director Josh Brooks, on Monday on the beat with Mike, kind of essentially echoed the same thing. So as I lead into the interview with Mike, let's hear Mike with Josh Brooks on why if you got the best coach in college football, as ESPN says that he is, you don't need to bring anybody else in to kind of help Kirby do his job. Here's Josh Brooks.
You've got a highly intelligent, highly involved head football coach. We have a great support staff underneath him. And then I think we've got a phenomenal executive staff. So there's just a lot of great continuity there. So I don't think any of us really ever wanted to just bring someone in from the outside and say, you're the GM, lead this. Like so it's us working together on that. And we're thankful we have a head coach who really gets it and knows what he wants. But in some form or fashion, we will take his lead on that and see how he wants to evolve and how different staff members' responsibilities may evolve. But I feel real good about our working relationship with him.
Josh Brooks says we're thankful to have a coach who gets it and knows what he wants. That's true about more than just being a GM. That's true about navigating all of the really challenging waters that college football programs find themselves trying to navigate right now. We would say best coach in college football, Georgia's still in very good hands with him at the moment, and that is around the doghouse. It's presented today by our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau. Now, legally, you have to have insurance. Auto insurance, something that everybody has to have. You have to have that. So the question you ask yourself is, okay, well then who do I want to work with? Who do I want to basically hire as my insurance representative, given the fact that I have to have that for my automobile, for my home, for things like that? Well, that's where our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau come into play, because we would say the best choice you can make is to work with friendly people who are living in Georgia just like you, they're in communities just like yours, agents, claims adjusters, people that kind of understand the role that insurance plays in your life. And that's what our folks at Georgia Farm Bureau are all about. I want you to give them a call, 877-404-1050. That's 877-404-1050, online, gfbinsurance.com. When you have that conversation, when you talk to them about your financial services needs or your insurance needs, here's what you're going to find out. What I've been saying for such a long time is certainly true, that Georgia Farm Bureau is always the home team. And we're glad to have Georgia Farm Bureau as a part of Around the Doghouse here today. So I told you, before we're done here today, the one coach other than Kirby Smart to get a vote as the top coach in college football, according to ESPN, you'll laugh at this, and more drama at Tennessee, battling with the NCAA, honestly, you'll probably laugh at that too. But for now, on more of what Josh Brooks had to say on Monday, when he joined Mike and everything else, the birthday man himself, let's talk to Mike Griffith here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Let's say hello to Mike Griffith here, DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. Mike, we just heard a clip from Josh Brooks, your interview from Monday. First of all, belated happy birthday to you. Also, how else did you find Josh Brooks to be here this week? Obviously, a lot of success for Georgia athletics. Diamond Dogs look like a national seed. Softball team, super regional. Women's tennis celebrating a national championship. I'm imagining it's probably a pretty good time to be Josh Brooks right now.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, BA, it started out with you. I mean, part of the reason, Josh likes to come on DawgNation is he does appreciate the daily product, not just DawgNation.com, but, every day you're coming in front of Georgia fans and kind of letting them know what's going on. And I think Josh appreciates that. He recognizes that that's a good way for the university to stay out in front when you've got a vehicle like DawgNation that covers everything and has a daily presence and a daily opinion like you do. I mean, I think bringing up this Kirby Smart coaching list and the wins, I mean, this is fascinating stuff. And yeah, Georgia can send out an email release to the media, but it really takes someone bringing it to life and putting it into perspective. I thought you did a really good job with that. And yes, Josh is really excited. He had an opportunity to go down and see women's tennis win a national championship, the track team. You saw the women's program win the SEC outdoor meet. The men finished second. You saw softball come from behind and upset Duke in a regional on the road. Of course, the baseball team takes 2 out of 3, gets 18 wins, number 1 in the RPI, which is just amazing that in 2 years, Wes Johnson has elevated the Dogs to number 1. And just great recruiting going on. I know everyone's following Jeff Sentell, and tonight, before the hedges, he'll have his program to catch everybody up on that. So, yeah, I mean, it is a great time to be the University of Georgia athletics program.
I think you're right about that. I'll invite people to go back and check the archives, DawgNation YouTube, the best place to do that. You can see the full interview that Mike did with Josh Brooks earlier this week. I think it's really interesting stuff, including the clip we played a moment ago. Let me talk to you about what we were just discussing, Kirby Smart as the top coach. I think we'd say that right now that's fairly inarguable. I would take it, though, the step further to say that if you have the choice of having the best player, the best coach, I still think in college football you want the best coach. And in fact, if you had the choice of best coach or what's kind of viewed as the best roster overall, I still think the best coach is going to be better at kind of populating a roster. Professional sports, I've said this in the past, that really to me is a platform for general managers. The best GM in the NBA is going to put the best roster together. Major League Baseball, the NFL kind of function very much the same way. You got to be creative about how you manage salary caps and budgets and things like that. Maybe one day college football becomes a lot more like that. Frankly, I hope it doesn't, but maybe it does. For now, though, the most valuable commodity in college football is having the best coach. We would have said that when Alabama had Nick Saban for all those years when Georgia's trying to get to that level. Now Saban's gone. Kirby's the guy on top. We'll keep saying it again, that this is still a sport where coaching matters, and to have the best coach is the sort of weaponry that's going to give you a big leg up, we would say, going into an upcoming season. Do you agree?
Well, yeah, and if you were trying to construct a best coach for college football, you would make Kirby Smart, right? Because this is a guy who is an academic All-American from the Terry College of Business. And right now, as you just noted, this is more of a business than ever before. So you've got someone that understands the dynamics of business. You mentioned Nick Saban and what he did in the previous era of college football, pretty much, pre-NIL, pre-transfer portal. I mean, Saban basically waved a white flag and ran for the hills when all this hit. And here's Kirby Smart in the middle of it. You need someone with that insatiable desire to win, and that is a Kirby Smart trademark. This guy is hungry. He's never satisfied, and you have to have that sort of desire to kind of weather the current system. You need someone that is an excellent recruiter. You need someone who's excellent in X's and O's. And right now, continuity is really big when we take a look around the college profession and how many times coaches change jobs. You want someone with that staying power, and who better than someone who actually went to the school and played for the school and was an all-SEC player and a team captain. So if you were going to draw up the perfect college football coach, it would be Kirby Smart. I mean, he basically has all the characteristics that you'd want. And I throw this caveat in there for Josh Brooks. You would want an athletic director that understood the partnership that has to take place between big-time college football and the athletic department. It is the engine that drives the revenue train. And Josh understands that because, and here we go, let's draw up the perfect AD. This is a guy who was an equipment manager for Nick Saban at LSU. This is a guy who was a student volunteer coach under Jimbo Fisher. This is a guy who was at one point a GA coach on a staff at a smaller school. This is a guy who was a football operations director at the University of Georgia. Josh Brooks, a guy with a background in facilities management. And what do we see right now? You know, the incredible race for facilities, not just football, but the brand new track being built, the $38.5 million softball, the $45 million baseball. So to me, it's the perfect marriage of an incredibly talented head coach, a young aspiring athletic director with an ideal background to work with a football coach, and not just any football coach, but another football coach who was under Nick Saban, who, again, from the previous era. You could transplant Nick Saban into now, and I would tell you that Kirby Smart would still be the better coach because of the lay of the land. And I think that that's really important to note. Now, that said, I'll take you off on a little tangent here. We need some leadership. And I would absolutely put Nick Saban in charge if we could have a commissioner, because right now, this judge in California ain't getting it done. You're seeing, like you said, Tennessee dissenting, from a level of organization that college sports is trying to have with this leadership commission to govern the sport. So right now, I'd love to see Saban in charge of everything. And right now, if you're Georgia, there's nobody you'd rather have than Kirby Smart in this era.
Yeah, I mean, I guess to piggyback off that for a second, we'll kind of get back to the Georgia football conversation on the field. But, I think you and I have talked about this before, that I think there's a lot of powers that be within college athletics. They're sort of hoping this House versus NCAA settlement, which we've heard over and over again, is going to somehow allow them to kind of regain some order and structure within the sport. And as I've told you, I'm no lawyer. I don't know how all the legal stuff plays out necessarily, but I am capable of just looking at a scenario and calling balls and strikes. And as I've told you, there's just not enough agreement about the compensation part of this to allow the structure to be formed around this. And so I don't know, what it results in terms of lawsuits or the statutes in particular here. They're going to be I'm not legal. I don't have a legal mind. I don't know that, but I do know human behavior, and the level of disagreement around the compensation part of this, I would say, is so great right now that whatever people are hoping happens as a result of this so-called House versus NCAA settlement, Mike, as I've told you before, I just simply don't think it's going to happen. That whatever the future is, there is no magic solution coming from this particular legal wrangling, I don't believe.
Yeah, and I get that. We often say that sports is a microcosm of our society, BA, and certainly the court system isn't perfect right now, and you're seeing how long this has taken. This is after 5 years of litigation and preliminary approval last fall, and the hearing was April 7th, and here we sit. May 21st, I don't know what the judge is doing. Okay, you've asked for this and you've gotten that, and hey, it's time to bang the gavel and make a ruling. I mean, this is what you're there for in Northern California, of all places, where this is, and not exactly the collegiate sports hotbed. I don't understand the delay, but what's happened because of the delay is now we're seeing some problems mushroom up. And we're seeing some other people take some initiatives to disrupt what looks like would be a pretty decent settlement in terms of, what you're trying to accomplish with the back pay of the last 10 years of the student athletes to be compensated for NIL, with the roster restrictions, which would enable, no scholarship limits. So the student athletes that are playing sports would be, most all of them 100% scholarship at the University of Georgia. Josh talked about adding over 100 scholarships. I mean, this is a good thing, having a cap, so you do have somewhat of a level playing field, and yet you allow the student athletes to sign some fair market agreements outside of that cap. Arch Manning with his $8 million. Okay, we get it. He's a Manning, he's valuable, and yes, he can make money from national companies that aren't associated with the University of Texas. So to me, this is a decent settlement, but because of the system in place, because of the bureaucracy, and you could say in our country, and again, we're seeing this play out in sports now, the microcosm of society, we're saying, you know what? the courtroom ain't the place for this. And the NFL knows that, right? But you got to get that antitrust exemption. That's what you need, because you can't have a democracy, because not all the universities are created equally. And as you said, everyone wants to try to manage and finagle this for their own benefit. You see what Tennessee recently did, with what the bill their governor signed, and how they want to be exempt, from this, sports commission, essentially. So to me, I think that what we're seeing is we're trying to bring our judicial system and our legislative process into collegiate athletics, and we're finding out what a mess it really is, because they can't get it done. So at some point, collegiate sports is going to have to make a decision and try to get a czar. And of course, we're here because the former NCAA president, Mark Emmert, did such a poor job.
On a completely different subject, I thought the Athens Banner-Herald had interesting reporting this week about the just enormous amount of money that Georgia and Florida are about to get for playing in both Atlanta and Tampa. The next 2 years after this one, $7.5 million, I guess. And when the series shifts back to Jacksonville, when the renovated stadium is going to be ready, all of a sudden now we're talking about an annual payment of like $10.5 million. Now I don't get any of that money, so it doesn't necessarily benefit me. But boy, for a world in which every dollar matters in college athletics now, the presence, and I know backstory here, you've never been the biggest fan of the cocktail party. I don't see how now you view this as anything other than a pretty big weapon for both Georgia and Florida, and I guess Texas and Oklahoma will have their version of this too, where all of a sudden that is a major financial windfall that the rest of the SEC does not look poised to get. Seems like both Georgia and Florida look like big winners right here.
Oh, yeah. Now it makes sense. Now you have that major financial incentive, and also the home recruiting weekend in season isn't as important as it once was. I mean, now that we're seeing NIL and we're seeing how players are getting paid, now the model has shifted where you do want the big payday. Now it makes sense to maybe sacrifice that home game to make that extra money that's going to enable you to enhance your facilities, to pay your coaches. There is a $20.5 million cap, but one would imagine that playing in the Jacksonville market could open up some NIL opportunities, a different level of exposure. It looks like Florida will once again be competitive, or they're on the verge, it appears, with DJ Lagway, provided he's healthy. This could be a game once again. We saw that recent poll we ran, Brandon, where 65 or 67% of the fans polled said the Alabama game was the one they look forward to the most. Another 30% said Texas, and 4% said Florida. It's probably more about the level of competitiveness in those games, and still Alabama to me does look like the hump. Thankfully, that has been a home and home. Last year, Tuscaloosa, here Athens. As for the paydays in Atlanta and Tampa, I know there was some movement, some talk about, boy, wouldn't it be great to play a home and home in this 2 years while the stadium of the future is being built in Jacksonville. Another reason why it makes sense, you're going to have an elite facility down there. The old cocktail party game, that old stadium had gotten old and kind of rancid. I wasn't real impressed with that setting. I think we're going to see a beautiful futuristic setting. So to me, to your point, absolutely. I sign off on it now because it makes a lot of sense, and you're not losing something. Back then, losing that home recruiting weekend, I thought that was a big disadvantage for Georgia in several of those years.
So let me kind of build to this then, because I think next week you've got the SEC spring meetings coming up in Destin, Florida. You know more about this than I do because you've attended it so many years. But my prediction is next week they are going to essentially confirm and announce that the league is moving to a 9-game conference schedule for the future. So here's where I think it gets interesting. With Georgia, Florida, the cocktail party in our lives for the foreseeable future, and with like Texas and Oklahoma kind of having their version of this too. So do these teams that have the yearly neutral site game, do they get in a 9-game conference schedule 4 home, 4 away, and then 1 off neutral site game to sort of be the 9th game? Will they be forced to play kind of a 3-1-5, type model with, an imbalance between home games and road games? Because it would certainly be good for Georgia and the others if they do give them the 4-4-1. But that also, limits the number of true road games they have to play in a given year, which I would imagine some SEC teams might not be super happy about if they're having to play 5 true road games and Georgia, Florida, Texas, Oklahoma never have to play 5 true road games. I think it could get pretty interesting on that, or we may see a situation in future years where every SEC team tries to find its neutral site game, so everybody can have the 4-4-1. I don't know that we ever get to that point in time, but if they do confirm going to 9, I believe they will in the very near future, whether it's next week or not, kind of finding out what that means for Georgia, Florida in the future, I think becomes interesting because you've got a couple of these teams in the SEC that'll have the neutral site every year going forward.
Yeah, no, I think you make a good point. And I would presume that that's what they would do, Brandon. And yes, maybe some other schools could cry foul, but how many years did Georgia have an imbalance of fewer home games than everyone else when it was the 4-4 model, when there were 8 games, right? When Georgia's assigned home game was that neutral site 70 miles from Gainesville. So to me, I can't imagine a 3-5. Certainly will check into that. It would seem to make sense 4-4-1. As for other schools, maybe moving some games around to neutral sites. That's an interesting idea. I suppose if they could make the sort of money that Georgia and Florida will make by playing the game in Jacksonville, they would probably look at that. I can't think of many other scenarios where that would happen. Maybe Vanderbilt, Tennessee, although I would say Vanderbilt would be more likely to sell their home game to Nissan Stadium in Nashville because of the bigger crowd, perhaps a bigger gate. If Vanderbilt can stay competitive, I know they have their quarterback back one more year, and Tennessee basically punted a returning starter quarterback over $2 million, which seems paltry in the big picture to me. But I think you bring up some really good points and some interesting ideas. If these schools would be willing to do that, Arkansas, maybe a game with Texas or Texas A&M, would they perhaps want to play that in Dallas? I think we've seen that in the past. A&M, I think, and Arkansas used to do that. So is there an appetite for that? I'm not really sure. I'm sure those schools will check into that. Everybody right now checking into everything in terms of different ways to produce added revenue.
Yeah, I think it could get really interesting, Mike. No doubt about that. We'll have plenty of coverage of all of that here coming up, including Georgia getting ready for a pivotal 2025 season, too. We appreciate your time today. We do wish you a happy birthday, and we'll look forward to.
I got one more question for you, BA.
By all means.
Georgia's playing in the SEC baseball tournament, right? They've already likely wrapped up a super regional top 8 seed, and it brings into question how Wes Johnson plays in the SEC baseball tournament. Obviously, you don't want to play your starting pitchers more than you need. So here's my question and my proposal that I'll leave you with. How about playing the SEC baseball tournament in the middle of the season while it's still relevant? Because right now, this is a great collection of great talent, and yet you look at 4 or 5 or 6 of these teams that have already wrapped up bids, and they're really not going to throw their best many innings. So I just wanted to leave you with that thought, that idea, kind of maybe let you chop it up, because I do think it's fascinating. I mean, obviously it's a great collection of talent down there, but we all know Georgia hosting the regionals and the super regionals has to be Wes's priority. And I'd say a lot of the other schools are taking the same approach. So maybe a mid-season SEC baseball tournament.
I actually really like that. Mike, to be honest with you, I actually really like that idea for maybe both baseball and basketball, for instance. I think that's actually a pretty good idea, especially in light of the fact that we just saw the softball not even crown an SEC champion because it rained. We definitely are in football's right in the same boat here. We are definitely in kind of a precarious spot when it comes to the future of SEC championships. I care more about it in football than anything else, but I don't like this recent trend. I don't think your idea is a bad one. I really don't.
All right. Like I said, just wanted to throw it out there because I'm thinking to myself, doggone, I know people are going to say, oh, Georgia, they haven't won an SEC baseball tournament game. And, look, the big prize is at the end. And this is a team that wants to go to the College World Series and win it all. And if you're Wes Johnson, why in the world would you exhaust your team in a tournament that, quite frankly, you don't have much to play for there other than making a good representation of your school? So just that thought as we go in. I know the Georgia baseball team's scheduled to play at 5:30 today against Oklahoma. Maybe they punch one out, but when they play Vandy tomorrow, like Wes said, not going to throw a starter more than 3 or 4 innings in this tournament.
Mike, good stuff. We'll talk to you soon here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management.
Thanks, BA. Have a good one.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
So let me tell you why I think that's a good idea. There is some precedent for this in sports. The last couple of years, the NBA has had its in-season tournament. Does the in-season tournament have a name? Is it just the in-season tournament? It's called the NBA Cup. So there is some precedent for a tournament during the season. I think that a lot of teams would like the idea, whether it's the RPI in baseball or the NET in basketball, I think they'd like the idea of getting some more quality wins. I also think that in sports, one of the things that's really, really popular is single elimination tournaments. You think about the sporting events in America that people love the most. NFL playoffs, college football playoff, March Madness. What do these things have in common? This sounds dumb, but I'm being serious. They're single elimination tournaments. So if you put, for instance, the basketball tournament in Nashville, not in March, and as we've told you, for people who care about bubble status for NCAA tournament teams, stuff like that, the committee does not watch the tournament. If there's a bid thief, if some team outside the at-large field wins the tournament, well, they have to acknowledge that. But if so-and-so pulls a shocking upset and beats whoever, and maybe that gets them on a better seeding line, or maybe that gets them in the tournament, the committee doesn't care. They're not watching those. But if you played it in February, maybe they might. The baseball, the regional, super regionals are so good that if you didn't move the SEC tournament to during the season, kind of creating some space away from that, it might give some, attention to baseball. But the truth is, I told you before, I don't think, I know that I come across weird sometimes. I don't think the powers that be, whether it be ESPN, the major rights holder, or the actual leagues themselves, I think the dirty little secret is I don't think they want baseball to be more popular. I think baseball becoming more popular does nothing but create problems for them at the institutional level. I think the certain powers that be across college athletics would like to see a lid on baseball's popularity, because if they allowed it to grow at all, I think its potential is exponential because you already see an amazing kind of grassroots ground level of support for baseball. But I don't think, for various reasons, I don't think they want it to get much more popular than it is here at the moment, because in the budget constraints world we're moving into, a more popular sport like baseball growing would only cause trouble. But that's a different topic for a different day. Instead, for now, let's get ready to go cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And speaking of budgets, I hope you're budgeting right now for a great Royal Caribbean cruise vacation sometime here in 2025, early 2026. And if I could plant one seed into your mind for Royal Caribbean cruise vacations, it's this. Early is better when it comes to all of the great stuff that you got going on in the Royal Caribbean. In fact, if you're watching video right now, that's the Aquadome. Now, this is one of the cool things that you're going to see on the brand new Star of the Seas, and you did see this on Icon of the Seas as well, that what we kind of think of on the old Oasis class of ships as the Aqua Theater on the back of the ships where the high diving show takes place, and it's one of the most amazing shows you'll see on land or sea. That Aqua Theater in the Icon class of ships has been moved into the center of the ship. They call it an Aquadome. It's just an amazing way to experience entertainment. It's one of the things that makes the brand new Icon class of ships so exciting. And I want you to be thinking about the travel you might take in 2026, the travel you might take, later on this fall. I want you to be thinking months, if not years in advance, so you can get the best pricing, so you can secure the best options, stateroom availability, things like that. Royal Caribbean is a red-hot brand right now. So the more into the future you're thinking about your Royal Caribbean cruise vacation, I think the more enjoyable it's going to be for you, and frankly, oftentimes the best pricing opportunities on that as well. So Jessica Slater is standing by right now. Give her a call, 770-718-9147, 770-718-9147. You can also email her at jslater@dreamvacations.com. And by the way, when we're thinking well ahead, we're also thinking about our DawgNation cruise coming up next April. Can't wait to see you there for that. All right, let's do a couple of things here, cruising around the SEC just for a moment. So there is a guy named Zakai Ziegler. He is a Tennessee basketball player. He has played basketball for 4 years, but he's now suing the NCAA because he wants more eligibility. Here's how the Knoxville News-Sentinel reports this. The lawsuit alleges that the NCAA's rule permitting only 4 seasons of competition within the 5-year eligibility window is an unlawful restraint of trade under federal and state antitrust laws. We sort of knew this was coming at some point in time. This was just going to happen. We knew this was coming. That someone was going to challenge the idea of, well, how come I can only play for 4 years? We've seen this done on the basis of a junior college year or a Division II year counting. But now you've got a guy who didn't have any of that, just basically saying, I just want to play for more. I want more of a chance to play. Now, I don't care much about Zagai Ziegler. I really don't. But I do think there are two things that come to mind here for this. Thing number one is this. When you hear people say, and people say this a lot, well, the only solution to all of the problems that are plaguing college athletics right now are to make the athletes into actual employees and then collectively bargain with them the same way that all professional sports collectively bargain with their labor force. This story is an example of why that isn't quite as true as what some people sort of think that it is. You've got guys like Jay Billis all the time going out there about like, you got to have collective bargaining. You've got to have employee status. You've got to have things like that. It is, if you'll allow me to say it this way, a little bit of kind of a midwit take. It's one of those things that, is sort of a, I would say, dumb opinion that's made to sound like a smart opinion. And this is that's my point of view on this. You have every right to feel differently than me, of course. The reason why I feel like this is sort of a midwit take, which kind of overly simplifies the situation, is exactly kind of demonstrated by this particular story. You have many more times worth of college athletes than you have professional athletes in a given sport. The relatively smaller number of professional athletes in the NFL or the NBA or Major League Baseball, as for instance, means that you're going to have a little bit more commonalities about what the various players want. But even in professional sports, you also have some major challenges. For instance, if you followed what has happened with, like, say, Live Golf and the PGA Tour, some of that is because of the Saudi Public Investment Fund just spending so much money. But part of the ability of the Saudis to kind of come in and take over a portion of professional golf was made possible because of some deep-seated anger that some PGA Tour golfers had with the PGA Tour, where a lot of the very best golfers didn't feel like they were being paid anywhere near what they were worth, and a lot of guys kind of outside the top 125 were being paid far more than their actual market value was. That was a real issue when it came to the PGA Tour. You also saw that, like, say, years ago in Major League Baseball, where maybe many of you are aware of, a player like Barry Bonds felt like he didn't need to be in the Players Association. If the Players Association he thought was for lesser players, his value was such that he didn't need to pay union dues and be in there with, kind of the sort of ham and egger playing for the league minimum. Bonds thought he was bigger than that. So even in professional sports, the idea of we're going to band together as a union and fight against management, it's not always quite as simple as I think some people make it out to be. In college sports, it's far more complicated than that, because when you think about the thousands of athletes who play Division I, there are far more incentives and motivations and desires among that potential labor force, if you want to think about it that way. For instance, someone like Zakai Ziegler wants to play college basketball forever. So if he had his vote in a collective bargaining, he'd say, well, we don't want 4 years of eligibility anymore. We want 8 or 9 years of eligibility because I want to just sort of keep doing this forever. But think about who that locks out. It locks out the future college athletes, those who are high school juniors and seniors who are going to have a roster spot taken away from them because the veteran players who are currently playing just don't want to get a job, I guess. And I think that's a real issue of, well, if you want to collectively bargain as college athletes, who counts as a college athlete? Is it someone near the end of his eligibility who wants to hold on for longer? Is it someone who hasn't started being a college athlete yet, but soon they will be? Like, when we're talking about collective bargaining with college athletes, the definition of who actually counts as a college athlete is a little bit more complicated than perhaps you realize. I also mentioned to you earlier, I was going to tell you, so Bill Belichick was the other name in the ESPN story, one of the writers, not one of the more famous ones to be frank, that ranked Belichick as his top coach in college football. His reason for doing so was, well, I just think he's the greatest football coach of all time, so how could he not be the top college football coach. Now, my point in bringing this up is not to say, well, Kirby Smart got slighted by this love for Bill Belichick. The truth is, Kirby Smart's position as the top coach in college football is not threatened by the presence of Bill Belichick, whether the ESPN vote was unanimous or not. Instead, it's to sort of point this out. It is amazing to me how wrong certain people are getting the Bill Belichick story, and that's before you bring up anything related to what's-her-face, who he's dating or allegedly engaged to, if you care about that sort of thing. Before you even bring up her at all, just the Belichick story alone. I think that people have at least some people, small minority, but some people, I think that some people seem to think that because Belichick is arguably the greatest pro football coach of all time, he's going to come down here to college football and he's going to teach all of us rednecks down here at this level of the game a thing or two about how football is really played. And I'm here to tell you, that is not going to happen. I am as sure of this as I am of anything, that Belichick really is a great pro football coach, and his resume showed that. But college football and the NFL are completely different. And just because there's a certain stripe of person who lives, north of where I live that seems to think that the NFL is far superior to college football, and obviously, TV ratings-wise, things like that would certainly bear that out. It's the most popular sport in America. I don't deny that. That doesn't mean that college football is easier to succeed at than it is in the NFL. We have all kinds of examples of people trying to take refuge in college football from the NFL and not having great success. I think the way I would sort of compare this is this. Think about like the first chair violinist in the London Symphony Orchestra. Talented musician, knows the instrument. Now, bring that person to the Grand Ole Opry and say, okay, now it's time to play a fiddle. Maybe they can do it, but even though to the untrained eye it sort of looks like the same instrument, the actual job is very, very different. And I'd say it's the same thing when it comes to Bill Belichick here too. Obviously a great football coach. We would say historic football coach. I don't have any problem with somebody saying the best NFL coach of all time. I just don't think that means nearly as much as some people seem to think it means when it comes to now making the transition to college football. I've said before, I'm not sure he even coaches a game. If he does coach a game, I don't think he'll last much longer than a year because I don't think he's properly counted the cost of what it takes to truly succeed in college football. It will make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. True story, before the show begins here today, I take some time to settle in and get ready for the show, but also go over and put a couple of ice-cold Dr. Peppers in the refrigerator here at our brand-new studio because I want the chance to enjoy all of that when I'm done. It's sort of my special treat at the end of the show, the thing that I enjoy doing, settling in and taking advantage of that. And frankly, you deserve a great treat like that during the day as well, whether it's the kind of the more traditional Dr. Pepper that you grew up with, or the brand new Dr. Pepper Blackberry, Dr. Pepper Blackberry Zero Sugar that you perhaps seen on the shelves of your local supermarket, your local Kroger, things like that. Wonderful flavors we head towards the summer. A great way to just enjoy yourself a nice little beverage treat during the day. Because when it comes to Dr. Pepper and DawgNation Daily, it's a pepper thing. We certainly love our Dr. Pepper and glad to have them a part of DawgNation Daily each and every week here on our program. And as we get ready to say goodbye to you here today, we'll get ready to do a golden shoe. And I'll tell you, I love this. Our guy Tyrone Brown sent me an email about this. Tyrone's one of these guys that's doing real work out there every day. He's moving dirt. He's making stuff happen. And he said this wasn't his dump truck, but it's one that he loves. And if you're watching on video, you obviously see this. How about the very clever kind of UGA design logos in the back of that? I love to see that. And I see a lot of this kind of stuff where people are like customizing their work trucks and things like that. And I love that so many people that are doing real work, they're not just pushing a sheet of paper around a desk, but actually, no offense to those who do that, but those people who are actually moving earth, making things, building stuff. Boy, I love that segment of our audience here, Tyrone Brown included. So Tyrone, thanks for sharing that. We'll give you a golden shoe. Nothing makes me more proud to know that folks like that, hardworking people, are listening to our show. Lousy, stinking Gators, The only thing they're working hard at is trying to keep up with Georgia, and it's not working right now. How about 1,656 days? That is how long it's been since Florida has beaten Georgia. That is our Gator Hater Updater. We appreciate you being with us, and we'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. We will look forward to talking to you then. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews is the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time, doing the work that's promised for the price that's promised. You can trust them on all of that. We'll get your comments here. I'm going to start with YouTube today because yesterday I wasn't able to because they were talking about all kinds of nonsense, but we'll get ready to do that here today. Tyrone Brown in our YouTube comment section celebrating his golden shoe. Tyrone, we love that. Tennille said, did IMG Academy get bought? I didn't know that. I didn't see that. Did that really happen? I might withhold comment on that, Tennille, but that's certainly very interesting. I did not quite see that. I did not quite see that. Chef Jay Bowen says the Texas A&M is killing Mississippi State right now. Yeah, I mean, A&M obviously just trying to fight for its NCAA tournament lives here right now. So, yeah, there you go. Let us see what else. Let's see what else. Paul Moon also acknowledging Dr. Pepper famous for its 23 different flavors. I think the thing with like when they bring in like the blackberry or the strawberry or something like that, that's kind of an accent on a flavor profile that kind of already exists within the beverage a little bit. Kind of what some of that is. Let us see what else. Chef Jay Bowen says he's looking forward to watching college baseball all day. I'll tell you, when it comes down to the regionals and super regionals, I love that, man. I think it's about as good as it can get. You know, I mentioned before, one of the things that Americans like are single elimination tournaments. Here's the other thing, and I do think that when it comes to like college football's playoff format, they could probably think a little bit more about this. Americans like all-you-can-eat sports buffets. I don't really know how else to say it other than that. Like Americans love first 2 days of the NCAA tournament. Really, for those of you that are big NFL fans, you may know people kind of like this. You may be one of these people yourself. Americans sort of like wild card weekend, divisional round weekend, and then by the time you get down to like conference championship weekend, when you've only got 2 games left, even though that and the Super Bowl are the biggest games, there's a degree to which some people sort of act like, well, the football season's now basically already over because now there's only one game on during the particular broadcast window. I'm not watching like 1,000 things at once, like Red Zone channel during the regular season. So that's kind of what college baseball gives you, is that onslaught of, and I think ESPN does like I forget what they call it, the bases loaded thing or whatever, where they kind of give you their own sort of Red Zone version of all of that. It's really fun. One of the few things they do seem willing to do to kind of help promote baseball, strangely enough. But Americans kind of like this sort of onslaught of all-you-can-eat sports buffets. And so I would say that one of the mistakes the college football playoff has sort of made is, and I get why they do this, they're spacing out their games because they want to take advantage of the big broadcast windows, trying to avoid the NFL. But they honestly might do well to sort of cram this stuff into like one day where you just like sort of bounce from one game to the next. As the playoff expands, those first round days, just making them really large in terms of, kind of rolling from one game to the next, the public might actually like that a little bit better. Let's see what else. RKD says that UNC should have hired Schumann or someone young. Yeah, I mean, I really believe, and I've said this plenty, this is the sort of mistake that an SEC team would not have made. I mean, I think North Carolina is just unserious. And I think the way their unseriousness shows up here is they're fixated by celebrity status more so than the actual job of college football. And I'm just telling you, college football is a different job than the NFL. There are plenty of college coaches that might not be able to succeed in the NFL. I don't deny that. But there are a lot of NFL coaches who would find college football a lot more difficult than they realize. There's also some of that true. There's also some of that going on too. Let's see what else. James Richard asked when the next possible Georgia commit is scheduled to announce. It's a good question. Good question. Oh, by the way, tonight we'll have more on that with Jeff Sintel before the hedges, including, I believe, now we referenced a little bit with Tyler Atkinson yesterday, but more of Jeff's conversation with Tyler Atkinson. You'll get that tonight, along with Kaylee Manziel before the hedges presented by Kroger. So when Jonathan Aaron was asking about Mount Rushmore's earlier, this was before our show began, he said, should there be one for the various eras? I think you could do that, but I also think whether it's Major League Baseball or Georgia football, whatever else, the more you kind of make multiple Mount Rushmores, I do think you sort of defeat the purpose of Mount Rushmores. It's almost like instead of your Georgia football Mount Rushmore, you could do your Georgia football Supreme Court, who are your 9 guys. You could do some version of that. But if you say, well, this is my Mount Rushmore for the 1940s and my Mount Rushmore for the 1990s, whether it's Major League Baseball or college ball or anything like that, I do think at a certain point you kind of, whittle down the kind of the device that is sort of a Mount Rushmore. But, you could also accomplish the same sort of thing by like, hey, who are your players of the decade? You could do that. I think last year we did do something similar to that with our friends over at the other place. George on Tap. This is actually an interesting point. George on Tap is a very wise man sometimes. And he said, if On3 only has 2 Georgia players in its top 100, then how can we trust their recruiting ranking, given the fact that so many Georgia signees were former highly rated recruits from On3? That's actually a very interesting point, George on Tap. I like that. That is a fun retort to that, I would say. Let's see what else. Bill Sanders says North Carolina with Bill Belichick is quite unserious, but the university itself would be a nice addition to the SEC. I agree with that. I am of the belief that if the SEC could expand, I believe that North Carolina would be its first choice. And that's why the Mickey Mouse games they're playing with their new head coach is so ridiculous. Like, North Carolina could be a major player. Like, they could be in whatever the future of college athletics is of, some people want to go to like a super league. Some people want to have more, kind of expansion within the SEC and the Big Ten and kind of have 2 competing side-by-side leagues. Like, whatever the future looks like, hold on. Sorry about that. Whatever the future looks like, North Carolina could be a part of it. That's one of the reasons why the fact they're playing this sort of goofy thing with Bill Belichick, I think it looks even more ridiculous. Let's see what else. Jacob says we came to DawgNation.com to get more visiting time than we do on Facebook. Well, Jacob, whichever platform works for you, I'm glad you're here, and I'm happy to have the chance to talk with you. Garrison Tucker says, who throws the most picks in the SEC for 2025? That is an interesting question. Let me see if I can give you a decent-ish answer to that. I would say it's probably going to be, one of these teams that's, how about Austin Simmons at Ole Miss from the simple standpoint of, I don't think they're quite as talented as they were. They'll probably throw it plenty. They'll be losing a lot. Like, for instance, so you could say, well, what about maybe if Zach Calzada starts for Kentucky as just a for instance. But for certain teams like that, they'll just keep flip-flopping through quarterbacks. They'll just keep flip-flopping through quarterbacks if a guy's throwing a lot of picks. But, sometimes interceptions are also a hallmark of a quarterback a team trusts, because if you throw picks and you remain the quarterback, that means they really believe you give them the best shot and they're willing to take some risks with you. I mean, you see this sometimes in the NFL where even like very good quarterbacks oftentimes have slightly higher interception totals than you perhaps realize. So I could see somebody like that, kind of Ole Miss is trailing in games. I could see him throwing some picks. I'll give you another guy that I like, but I could see being on this list. I could see Diego Pavia leading the league in interceptions, because he didn't fight the courts and everything like that to come back and play small. I think he's going to be the quarterback version of grip it and rip it. That's Vanderbilt's only chance of winning anyway. He's darn near 30 years old, whatever he is. So I think they're just going to let him turn it loose, and I could see him throwing some picks. So it's not the guy that throws the most picks won't necessarily be the worst quarterback in the SEC. So let me give you both those. Somehow we got on the topic of Mount Rushmore. SEM Dog here at DawgNation.com gives you his. He says Sinkwich, Trippy, Herschel, and Brock. And those are all-time great players. And this is why sometimes Mount Rushmore is an interesting rhetorical device. For as good as Sinkwich and Trippy is, Georgia's got way too much what I'll call modern history to have two of its four best players be 1940s era players. That's my personal opinion. Now, this is all debate, so someone else could argue something different. But I am of the belief that when you look at how distinguished Georgia's modern history is, you can't have two of the four best players be from the 1940s. You can at Army, and I'm certain that they probably are. Glenn Davis, Doc Blanchard, guys like that. You might even could from a place like, say, Notre Dame. But I would say at a place like Georgia, where, especially in the 21st century, so many significant names have come through here. I think now Georgia has done enough where guys like Sinkwich and Trippy, their legacies have been surpassed. Now, that doesn't mean they should be forgotten. I mean, I tweeted about Charlie Trippy the other day. Trippy was both my grandfather's favorite player, I think. So, there's a lot to like, in my mind when it comes to Charlie Trippy, because of the connection I feel like, my grandfather's, had to him. But there's also been a lot of history since then, so much so that, someone's always going to kind of get lobbed off. And I would say that we're probably at a point now where what's happened for Georgia in the last 30 years, 25 years, 30 years is probably more significant than what happened in those formative years of the 1940s, as good as those guys were. Bill Sanders says that it's blatant recency bias not to have one of those earlier legacy players left out. I understand where you're coming from on that. I guess I would dispute that. I mean, maybe this makes me whatever the word is for, biased against my own era. But I don't think college ball from the 1940s and college ball from the 2020s, I don't think it's equal. I don't think it's equal. I do think the advances in the sport have made modern accomplishments more significant. I do. I do think that's true. Which is not to say that you can't be a historic figure from a bygone age. For instance, like George Washington, still a big figure in American history. He hasn't been surpassed necessarily by others, still a significant figure. But I do believe the current history of the sport, or the 21st century history of the sport, I do believe it's probably more important. It's a little bit like that with music too. Stuart Wig Dog checks in to say, I've been listening to you, BA. Great job, and love how you are pure dog, unlike so many bandwagon fans. Keep up the great work. Stuart, that is incredibly nice to hear. I really, really appreciate that. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. To me, the Sinkwich Trippy thing is a little bit like music. Like when I was a kid in the 80s, like I was a child in the 1980s, like the 1950s were still a pretty big deal. Think about the movie Back to the Future, for instance. That's a reference to an era that still had some cultural relevance. Like we had, it's 97 on the river now, but it used to be, was it Fox 97? Is that the name of the station? Played the oldies, like a lot of 50s music. Yeah, thank you. I'm being confirmed. Randy and Spiff, Fox 97. They played 50s music. They did not play 1940s music, and they just didn't. And I also remember when they stopped playing 1950s music, when they kind of only played 60s and they started playing some 70s. And then after that, people just decided they don't like oldies music anymore, I guess. Or unfortunately, the definition of what counts as oldies music may have also started to change, honestly compels me to admit. But when I was a kid, people were sort of fascinated with the 1950s. But people weren't really fascinated with the 1940s. I would say now, like, people are like really into like the 90s are huge right now. Like look on TikTok, how much 90s country you see on TikTok. It's amazing. It's really interesting what a sort of a small scale phenomenon that is. 90s hip hop had the Super Bowl a couple of years ago. Like the 90s are still really big. I would say the 60s don't feel all that relevant from a pop cultural standpoint anymore. That is just a natural thing that that whatever is sort of like, the people's memory span sort of includes like 2 or 3 decades prior to them. And then the decade just before that sort of gets lost to time a little bit. Now, I do think that for those of us who care about, like, say, Georgia's football history, it's important to not let, great figures be forgotten, great eras be forgotten. I'm the guy that's always touting for Georgia to be claimed as the 1946 national champion. I take some of this historical stuff pretty seriously. But I also think it is a naturally occurring phenomenon that guys like Trippy and Sinkwich will mean less over time. We see this in Major League Baseball where, to go back to my dad here for a moment, like my dad, like he literally grew up in the old, maybe you heard your dad talk about this, Willie, Mickey, and the Duke, Willie Mays, Mickey Mantle, Duke Snyder. Like 1950s baseball was a golden age. You don't hear as much about that anymore. It doesn't mean those players are any less good than they already were. I would say that Mantle and Mays count among the 10 best of all time, probably. But you don't hear as much about them anymore, and I just don't think there's a lot you can do to prevent that. Senior Dog 54 says, "Are you kidding, BA? The Beatles, Dylan, Woodstock, like those events are still historic, but you're not seeing as much of that in like pop culture as you used to. You're just not. You're just not. Like I said, that doesn't mean they're disappearing as historic figures. And obviously Dylan just had the movie. But overall, I don't think we're in kind of a 1960s era with pop culture. Let's see what else. Oh, Jacob, was Facebook having an issue? Let me pop over and see. Let me see what's going on if you're on Facebook for a moment. Yeah, it looks like we're on Facebook. Let's say hello to them. Johnny Prescott says, "Get off my porch, BA." Matt Rugavina says, "You don't hear a lot of Jimi Hendrix in the classic rock." Yeah, that's a perfect example. Like, I love the Hendrix catalog. I think I think it'd be really cool to see people discover that again. But I don't think that Jimi Hendrix currently has a lot of current cultural relevance. Doesn't make him any less less iconic of a musician, but you don't see a lot of that right now. So apparently there was a Facebook issue today. I am sorry about that. Let's see what else. Yeah, Matt Rukavina pointing out, people do this sometimes. It's always really scary to me that, like I mentioned Back to the Future a little earlier, like the date we are now from when Back to the Future came out is now longer than the date between Back to the Future in the 80s and that moment in the 1950s. Like that's crazy to me. That's crazy to me. Crazy to me. And people do this kind of thing all the time. There are various things like that. It's pretty wild. Pretty wild. Yeah, so sorry there was an issue on Facebook. I don't quite know what that was. But I will tell you, and I love y'all, and I'm just being honest. Facebook as a video platform does not work like it used to. And to me, it is telling when, to my knowledge, we have not had any interruptions on DawgNation.com and YouTube. Now, every now and then, DawgNation.com does have an issue. I won't dispute that. But over the course of the years, Zuckerberg and that crew, they just don't put the same manpower into the video product that they used to. That is a very, very finicky video platform. We're still there because we want to support people on the platform they're most comfortable on. And a lot of you spend a lot of time on Facebook. So therefore, we want to be there for you. But I'm telling you right now, just as objectively as I'm capable of being, Facebook as a video platform does not work like the others. It just doesn't. Let's see what else. Philip Wells says boomers and early Gen X are the only reason the 60s have mention in culture. Yeah, I don't know about that. I think that young people always are interested in eras prior to their own. I just think, unfortunately, the 90s now count as ancient times for this current generation. So therefore, I would say they're pretty fascinated with the 90s in the moment. Let's see what else. Paul Moon says, I don't think I would put Sinkwich or Trippy on my Mount Rushmore, but I would certainly not fault someone else for including them. Yeah, I don't really fault anybody for, if you put, a player that's obviously not in the discussion, I would fault you for that. But for the most part, there is a reasonable argument to be made for both Trippy and Sinkwich. I think it's a little bit more difficult to go back to I think it was SEM that had this. I think it's a little tough to make the case for both of them. If you wanted to make the case for one or the other, I think that's a little bit different. I think it's tough to make the case for both of them. Now, what's interesting is, and I think most of us would have to call on, the history books here to help us determine this, but, Sinkwich won the Heisman, Trippy didn't. I don't know, though, that people who knew that era would have universally agreed that Sinkwich was a better player than Trippy. In fact, there may be plenty of people who say that Trippy was better than Sinkwich. I think, worth keeping that in mind, that if you're going to choose just the one, Sinkwich having won the Heisman, I don't know gave him the nod over Trippy as much as some people might think it would. Jonathan Aaron says, speaking of old-time football, if you had a battle between the old Four Horsemen from Notre Dame and the Four Horsemen from Crockett Promotions, who would win? You already know who I'm taking there on that. I'm taking Tully and Arn and Ric Flair and, the horsemen of my generation would either been Ole Anderson or Lex Luger. Those were my original horsemen. So I'm probably taking them. I always thought it was interesting that when they did they don't even do like home video anymore, but when they did the DVD chronicling the Four Horsemen, going back probably 20 years ago or so now, when they on the 4 boxes on the thing, it was actually Barry Windham who got the 4th box, which I always thought was kind of interesting. Yeah, Greg Rosenberg on the case of, like, he says no Stetson Bennett for him. Look, Bennett was a Heisman finalist. I think he's very much worthy of being in the discussion, but you couldn't, in my mind anyway, I couldn't take Bennett over Brock Bowers. Y'all, the Bowers numbers at Georgia are just eye-popping. It's just staggering. How many touchdowns he had in 2023. I'm sorry, how many touchdowns he had in 2021, how many total receiving yards he had in 2022, cut short by injury in 2023. But, I mean, this is really a guy that should have won 3 Mackey Awards in 2021. He wasn't even a finalist, which is crazy. Like, Bowers is an all-time great player. I would say he has to be on there. Greg Rosenberg, he says he thinks that Jordan Davis has a bigger claim on a Mount Rushmore than Stat because he was nationally elite. I do get what you're saying. He was, national award winner, first-round pick. I do get that. I think that one of the differentiators moving forward in terms of Georgia football history, and y'all know how much I love Jordan Davis. I mean, Davis was a catalyst for the 2021 team. But some of these guys who have fingerprints on 2 national championships will be a big deal going forward. And the fact that Bennett was the starting quarterback for both national championships, that is a big deal. He's not a better player than Jordan Davis. He's really not. But it is a more important position overall. We do this all the time when it comes to quarterback. The fact that he did make significant contributions to both those national championship teams, what we hope are the first of many for Kirby Smart, but both those national championship teams, that in itself is going to be a pretty big deal. All right, we're going to get ready to go. By the way, Lance D mentioning, do you know that, like, we throw around these like generation names things? I am not that into like what name of generation you're in. That's not something I'm all that interested in for myself or other people. But do you realize that like the technical definition of millennial is someone born 1980 or later, prior to whatever the cutoff for Gen Z would be? It's kind of interesting to think that that the actual millennial generation, I think, at least according to those who've, seen fit to define this stuff, actually started a lot sooner than people realize. All right, anything else? Good to see our buddy Bo Molinarian here again today saying, I remember cutting school in the 5th grade to watch the premiere of the Thriller video on MTV. Yeah, 80s were a fun time, man. 80s were fun. I was a little bit younger than that when Thriller came out, but I'm telling you right now, my grandparents knew Michael Jackson and Thriller. Like, everybody knew Michael Jackson at that particular time. Everybody did. I would say the only musician whose fame in my lifetime has come close to that, what Taylor Swift experienced the last couple of years, I would say is a similar level of fame to the Michael Jackson thing from that period. Let's see what else. Anything else before we go? Back on Facebook one more time. Gary Holt checking out. Appreciate you being here. Matt Rugavina says, my wife's born in the late 70s, me in the early 80s. We feel like we were far closer than the later millennials. Yeah, it sort of feels like that's one of the reasons why I probably don't get too much into like the whole like generation definitions, is because, as you said, like within the various like groupings, you're going to have what almost feels like sort of like subgroupings. Perhaps that's the case. Grady Darcy also remembers, speaking of Brock Bowers, the individual play where, like, Matrix style, he contorts for the first down against Ohio State. This type of thing we'll be remembering forever. All right, good stuff, everybody. Y'all check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised, including With hot weather here, getting your air conditioning unit tuned up to factory fresh specs, you can find them online for all of that. rsandrews.com. You'll have a great day. Back tomorrow, DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management.